Chapter 1. It was past 2 o'clock when the job chaise turned into Hill Street, and as the watchman wending his way round Berkeley Square monotonously announced, "A fine night." A full moon rode in the cloudless sky, dimming the street lamps, even as the solitary traveller had noticed in Pall Mall, where gas lighting had replaced the oil burners. Linkmen, carriages, and light streaming from an open door on the east side of Berkeley Square indicated that not all the members of the ton had left London. But at the end of June the season was drawing to a close, and it did not surprise the traveller to find Hill Street deserted. It would not have surprised him if the knocker had been removed from the door of a certain house on the north side of the street. But when the chaise drew up, a swift scrutiny reassured him. The Earl of Denville's town residence had not yet been abandoned for the summer months. The traveller, a young man wearing a tasselled and corded Polish greatcoat and a shallow-crowned beaver, sprang down from the chaise, dragging a bulging portmanteau from the floor of this vehicle, set it down on the flagway, and pulled out his purse. The postboys paid, he picked up the portmanteau, trod up the steps to the front door, and gave the iron bell-pull a tug. By the time the last echo of the clapper died away, the chaise had disappeared, but no one had responded to the bell's summons. The traveller gave it a second and more vigorous tug. He heard it clanging somewhere in the nether regions, but was forced to conclude, after waiting for several minutes, that it had failed to rouse any of my lord's servants. He considered the matter. It was possible, though unlikely, that the household had removed from London without taking the knocker from the door or shuttering the windows. To verify that the windows had not been shuttered, he retreated to the flagway and scanned the house, perceiving that not only were all the windows unshuttered, but that one of them, on the entrance floor, had been left open a few inches at the top. This gave, as he knew, onto the dining-room, and to reach it presented a lithe and determined young man with no insuperable difficulty. Divesting himself of his greatcoat and trusting that no watchman would come down the street in time to observe his clandestine entry, he proceeded to demonstrate to the uninterested moon that Colonel Dan Mackinnon of the Coldstream Guards was not without a rival in the art of perilous climbing. No such thought entered the Honourable Christopher Fancott's head. He was not acquainted with Colonel Mackinnon, and he did not think the feat of reaching the desired window-sill either dangerous or difficult. Once there, it was easy to thrust up the lower sash and to swing himself into the room. A couple of minutes later he emerged into the hall, where, upon a marble-topped side-table, he found a lamp burning low, with an unlit candle in a silver holder standing beside it. Observing these objects with an intelligent eye, Mr. Fancott concluded that their noble owner had told his servants not to wait up for him. The subsequent discovery that the front door was unbolted confirmed him in this belief. As he opened the door to retrieve his belongings from the porch, he reflected, with an inward chuckle, that when his lordship did come home at last he would find his bed occupied by a most unlooked-for visitor, and would, in all probability, think that he was a great deal boskier than he had supposed. On this thought, which appeared, from the mischievous smile which played about the corners of his mouth, to afford Mr. Fancott amusement, he kindled the candle at the lamp's low flame, and made his way towards the staircase. He went softly up, the candlestick held in one hand, his portmanteau in the other, and his greatcoat flung over his shoulder. No creaking stair betrayed him, but as he rounded the bend in the second flight, a door opened on the floor above, and a voice said anxiously, "Evelyn?" He looked up, seeing in the light of a bedroom candle, held aloft in a fragile hand, a feminine form enveloped in a cloud of lace which was caught together by ribbons of the palest green satin. From under a nightcap of charming design, several ringlets the colour of ripe corn had been allowed to escape. The gentleman on the stairs said appreciatively, "What a fetching cap, love!" The vision thus addressed heaved a sigh of relief, but said with a gurgle of laughter, "Oh, you absurd boy! Oh, Evelyn, I'm so thankful you've come, but what in the world has detained you? I've been sick with apprehension." There was a quizzical gleam in the gentleman's eyes, but he said in accents of deep reproach, "Come, come, mamma." "It may be very well for you to say, 'Come, come, mamma,'" she retorted, "but when you faithfully promise to return not a day later than—" She broke off, staring down at him in sudden doubt. Abandoning the portmanteau, the gentleman shrugged the greatcoat from his shoulder, pulled off his hat, and mounted the remaining stairs, 2 at a time, saying still more reproachfully, "No, really, mamma, how can you be so unnatural a parent?" "Kit!" uttered his unnatural parent in a smothered shriek. "Oh, my darling, my dearest son!" Mr. Fancourt, receiving his widowed mamma on his bosom, caught her in a comprehensive hug, but said, on a note of laughter, "Oh, what a rapper! I'm not your dearest son." Standing on tiptoe to kiss his lean cheek and dropping wax from her tilted candle down the sleeve of his coat, Lady Denville replied with dignity that she had never felt the smallest preference for either of her twin sons. "Of course not. How should you, when you can't tell us apart?" said Mr. Fancourt, prudently removing the candlestick from her grasp. "I can tell you apart," she declared. "If I had expected to see you, I should have recognized you instantly. The thing was, I thought you were in Vienna." "No, I'm here," said Mr. Fancourt, smiling lovingly down at her. "Stuart gave me leave of absence. Are you pleased?" "Oh, no, not a bit," she said, tucking her hand in his arm and drawing him into her bedchamber. "Let me look at you, wicked one. Oh, I can't see you properly. Light all the candles, dearest, and then we may be comfortable. The money that is spent on candles in this house, I shouldn't have thought it possible if Dinting hadn't shown me the chandler's bill, which, I must say, I wish she had not. For what, I ask you, Kit, is the use of knowing the cost of candles? One must have them, after all, and even your father never desired me to purchase tallow ones." "I suppose one might burn fewer," remarked Kit, applying a taper to some half-dozen which stood in 2 chandeliers on the dressing-table. "No, no, nothing is more dismal than an ill-lit room. Light the ones on the mantelpiece, dearest. Yes, that is much better. Now, come and tell me all about yourself." She had drifted over to an elegant daybed and patted it invitingly, but Kit did not immediately obey the summons. He stood looking about him at the scene he had illumined, exclaiming, "Why, how is this, mamma? You were used to live in a rose-garden, and now one would think oneself at the bottom of the sea." As this was the impression she had hoped to create when at stupendous cost she had had the room redecorated in varying shades of green, she was pleased, and said approvingly, "Exactly so. I can't think how I endured those commonplace roses for so long, particularly when poor Mr. Brummel told me years ago that I was one of the few females whom green becomes better than any other colour." "It does," he agreed. His eyes alighted on the bed and crinkled at the corners as he saw that the billowing curtains were of gauze. "Very dashing. Improper, too." An enchanting ripple of laughter broke from her. "Fudge! Do you think the room pretty?" He came to sit beside her, raising her hand to his lips and planting a kiss in its palm. "Yes, like yourself. Pretty and absurd." "And like you," she retorted. He dropped her hand, not unnaturally revolted. "Good God! No, mamma." "Well, absurd at all events," she amended, thinking, however, that it would have been impossible to have found 2 more handsome men than her twin sons. The polite world to which they belonged would have said more temperately that the Fancourt twins were a good-looking pair, but by no means as handsome as had been their father. Neither had inherited the classical regularity of his features. They favoured their mother, and although she was an accredited beauty, dispassionate persons were agreed that her loveliness lay not so much in any perfection of countenance as in her vivacious charm. This, asserted her more elderly admirers, was comparable to the charm of the 5th Duke of Devonshire's first wife. There were other points of resemblance between her and the Duchess. She adored her children, and she was recklessly extravagant. As for Kit Fancourt, at 24, he was a well-built young man, slightly above the average height, with good shoulders and an excellent leg for the prevailing fashion of skin-tight pantaloons. He was darker than his mother, his glossy locks showing more chestnut than gold, and there was a firmness about his mouth which hers lacked. But his eyes were very like hers, lively, their colour between blue and grey, and laughter rarely from them. He had her endearing smile as well, and this, with his easy, unaffected manners, made him a general favourite. He was as like his brother as fourpence to a groat, only those most intimately acquainted with them being able to tell them apart. What difference there was did not lie perceptibly in feature or in stature, unless they were stood side by side, when it could be seen that Kit was a shade taller than Evelyn, and that Evelyn's hair showed a trifle more burnished gold than Kit's. Only the very discerning could detect the real difference between them, for it was subtle, and one of expression. Kit's eyes were the kinder, Evelyn's the more brilliant. Each was more ready to laugh than to frown, but Kit could look grave for no reason that Evelyn could discover, and Evelyn could plummet from gaiety to despair in a manner foreign to one of Kit's more even temper. As children they had squabbled amicably, and turned as one to annihilate any intruder into their factions. During boyhood it had been Evelyn who inaugurated their more outrageous exploits, and Kit who extricated them from the consequences. When they grew to manhood, circumstances separated them for long stretches of time, but neither physical separation nor mental divergence weakened the link between them. They were not in the least unhappy when apart, for each had his own interests, but when they met after many months, it was as though they had been parted for no more than a week. Since they had come down from Oxford, they had seen little of one another. It was the custom of their house for a younger son to embrace a political career, and Kit entered the diplomatic service under the patronage of his uncle, Henry Fancourt, who had just been rewarded for his labours in the ambassadorial field with a barony. He was sent first to Constantinople, but as his appointment as a junior secretary coincided with a period of calm in Turkey's history, he soon began to wish that he had persuaded his father to buy him a pair of colours, and even to wonder, with the optimism of one who had not yet attained his majority, whether it might not be possible to convince his lordship that he had mistaken his vocation. Stirring events were taking place in Europe, and it seemed intolerable to a spirited youth already dedicated to the service of his country to be thrust into a backwater. Fortunately, since the late Earl was quite the most unyielding of parents, he was transferred to St. Petersburg before the monotony of his first appointment had goaded him into revolt. If he had owed his start in diplomatic life to his uncle, it was his father who was responsible for his second step. Lord Denville might be inflexible, but he was sincerely attached to Kit, and not altogether unsympathetic. His health was uncertain, and for several years he had taken little part in politics, but he had some good friends in the administration. Kit was sent at the end of 1813 to join General Lord Cathcart's staff, and thereafter had neither the time nor the inclination to complain of boredom. Cathcart was not only ambassador to the Tsar, but also the British military commissioner attached to his armies, and in his train Kit saw much of the successful campaign of 1814. For his part, Cathcart accepted Kit unenthusiastically, and would have paid no more heed to him than to any of his other secretaries, if his son had not struck up an instant friendship with him. George Cathcart, a very youthful lieutenant in the 6th Dragoon Guards, was acting as his father's military aide-de-camp. Much of his time was spent in carrying dispatches to the several English officers attached to the Russian armies, but whenever he returned to what he insisted on calling headquarters, he naturally sought out his only contemporary on the ambassadorial staff. Inevitably, Kit came under his lordship's eye, and soon found favour. Cathcart thought him a likeable boy, with a good understanding and easy manners, exactly the sort of well-bred lad who was invaluable to an overworked and elderly diplomat obliged to entertain on the grand scale. He had tact and address, and, for all his engaging light-heartedness, an instinctive discretion. When his lordship journeyed to Vienna to attend the Congress there, he took Kit with him, and there Kit had remained. Lord Castlereagh, noticing him with aloof kindness for his uncle's sake, introduced him to the newly appointed ambassador, who happened to be his own half-brother, and Lord Stuart took a fancy to him. What Kit thought of Stuart, whom the irreverent at the Congress dubbed Lord Pumpernickel, he kept to himself. And if he was sorry to leave Cathcart, he was glad not to be sent back to St. Petersburg when the war was over. By then he had not only recovered from envy of George Cathcart's rare good fortune in having been appointed to Wellington's staff in time to have been present at Waterloo, but had become so much interested in the tangled policies of the peace that St. Petersburg would have seemed to him almost as remote from the hub of international affairs as Constantinople. He had met Evelyn abroad twice in the past 2 years, but had only once visited England to attend his father's funeral. Lord Denville had died quite suddenly in the early spring of 1816, and since that date, some 15 months previously, Lady Denville had not set eyes on her younger son. She thought at first that he had not altered at all, and said so. Then she corrected herself and said, "No, that's silly. You look older, of course you do. I'm remembering how you were used to look, or trying to. The thing is, you see, that Evelyn is older too, so I've grown accustomed. You are still exactly like him, you know. Dearest, I wish you could tell me how it comes about that you're here so suddenly. Have you brought home a dispatch? Do you carry dispatches like officers?" "No, I'm afraid not," he answered gravely. "King's messengers are employed on that business. I'm here to attend to urgent private affairs." "Good gracious, Kit, I never knew you had any," she exclaimed. "Oh, you're trying to hoax me." "Now, why?" "But I have got urgent private affairs," he protested. "You must know I have, Mamma. I've become a man of substance. In fact, what you might call a well-breeched swell." "I shouldn't call you anything so vulgar. Besides, it isn't true." "How can you say so when my godfather was so obliging as to leave his fortune to me?" he said reproachfully. "Is that what you mean? But it isn't a fortune, Kit. I wish it were, and I must own I thought it would be, for Mr. Bembridge was always said to be very well to pass. Only it turns out to be no such thing, and he was possessed merely of what Addlestrop, detestable creature, calls a competence. Poor man, I dare say it was not his fault, so you mustn't blame him." "I don't. A pretty easy competence, Mamma." "A competence," stated her ladyship with conviction, "cannot be described as easy. You are talking like Addlestrop, and I wish you will not." Kit was aware that the family's man of business had never been a favourite with his mother, but these embittered references to him seemed to call for explanation. "What's Addlestrop done to offend you, Mamma?" he asked. "Addlestrop is a— Oh, let us not talk about him. Such a screw, and so malignant. I can't think why I mentioned him, except that he told me when Mr. Bembridge died that there was no occasion for you to come home, because there are no estates in question, or anything you might be obliged to attend to yourself. Nothing but those detestable funds, whatever they may be. And pray don't tell me, Kit, for you might as well talk gibberish. I perfectly understand that they are holy, and must on no account be touched, and for my part I would never invest my money in anything so stupid." "Of course you wouldn't," agreed Kit. "It would never stay in your purse long enough to be invested in anything." She considered this for a moment, and then sighed and said, "No, that's true. It is the most lowering reflection. I have frequently tried to cultivate habits of economy, but I don't seem to have the knack of it. None of the Cliffs have. And the dreadful thing is, Kit, that such habits only lead to waste." He gave a shout of laughter, but although her eyes twinkled sympathetically, she said earnestly, "Yes, but they do. I purchased a cheap gown once because Papa cut up stiff over one of Celeste's bills. But it was so horrid that I was obliged to give it to Rimpton, without once wearing it, and when I gave orders for an economical dinner, Papa got up from the table and went straight off to the Clarendon, which is quite the most expensive hotel in London. Yes, you may laugh, but you have no experience of such matters. I assure you, the instant you begin to practice economy, you will find yourself spending far more than ever you did before you embarked on such a ruinous course." "No, shall I? Perhaps I'd better sell out the funds immediately and start wasting the ready." "Nonsense. I know very well you haven't come home to do that. "So what has brought you home, dearest? I'm persuaded it wasn't to look after these prodigious affairs of yours, so don't try to bamboozle me." "Well, not entirely," he admitted. He hesitated, colouring a little, and then said, meeting her look of inquiry, "To own the truth, I took a notion into my head, stupid, I dare say, but I couldn't be rid of it, that Evelyn is in some sort of trouble, or just botheration, perhaps, and might need me. So I made my prodigious affairs serve as a reason for wanting leave of absence. Now tell me I'm an air-dreamer. I wish you may." She said instead in a marvelling tone, "Do you still get these feelings, both of you? As though one's own troubles were not enough to bear." "I see. I am not an air-dreamer. What's amiss, Mamma?" "Oh, nothing, Kit. That is to say, well, nothing you can cure, and nothing at all if Evelyn returns tomorrow." "Returns? Where is he?" "I don't know," disclosed her ladyship. "No one knows." He looked startled and at the same time incredulous. Then he remembered that when she had first seen him and had mistaken him for Evelyn, she had sounded disproportionately relieved. She was not an anxious parent. Even when he and Evelyn were children, their truancies had never ruffled her serenity, and when they grew up and failed to return to the parental home at night, she had always been more likely to suppose that she had forgotten they had told her not to look for them for a day or two than to wonder what accident could have befallen them. He said in a rallying tone, "Gone off on the sly, has he? Why should that cast you into high fidgets, Mamma? You know what Evelyn is." "Yes, I dare say I shouldn't even have noticed that he wasn't here at any other moment, but he assured me when he left London that he would return within a se'nnight, and he has been away now for 10 days. So, you don't understand, Kit. Everything hangs upon his return. He is to dine in Mount Street tomorrow, to be presented to old Lady Staveley, and she has come up from Berkshire particularly to make his acquaintance. Only think how dreadful if he were to fail. We shall be at a fiddlestick's end, for she is odiously starched up, you know, and I collect from something Staveley said to me that already she doesn't like it above half." "Doesn't like what above half?" interrupted Kit, quite bewildered. "Who is she, and why the deuce does she want to make Evelyn's acquaintance?" "Oh, dear, hasn't Evelyn told you?" "No, I dare say there's been no time for a letter to reach you. The thing is that he is offered for Miss Staveley, and although Staveley was very well pleased, and Cressy herself not in the least unwilling, all depends upon old Lady Staveley. You must know that Staveley stands in the most absurd awe of her, and would turn short about if she only frowned upon the match. He is afraid for his life that she may leave her fortune to his brother if he offends her. I must say, Kit, it almost makes me thankful I have no fortune. How could I bear it if my beloved sons were thrown into quakes by the very thought of me?" He smiled a little at that. "I don't think we should be. But this engagement, how comes it about that Evelyn never so much as hinted at it? I can't recall that he mentioned Miss Staveley in any of his letters. You didn't either, Mamma. It must have been very sudden, surely. I'll swear Evelyn wasn't thinking of marriage when last I heard from him, and that's no more than a month ago. Is Miss Staveley very beautiful? Did he fall in love with her at first sight?" No, I mean he has been acquainted with her for, a long time, 3 years at least." "And has only now popped the question? That's not like him. I never knew him to tumble into love, but what he did so after no more than one look. You don't mean to tell me that he's been trying for 3 years to fix his interest with the girl? It won't fadge, my dear. I know him too well." "No, of course not. You don't understand, Kit. This is not one of his flirtations." She saw laughter spring into his eyes, tried to keep a solemn look in her own, and failed lamentably. They danced with wicked mirth, but she said with a fair assumption of severity, "Or anything of that nature. He has outgrown such follies." "Has he, indeed?" said Mr. Fancourt politely. Yes. Well, at all events, he means to reform his way of life. And now that he is head of the family, there is the succession to be considered, you know. So there is, said Mr. Fancourt, much struck. What a gudgeon I am! Why, if any fatal accident were to befall him, I should succeed to his room. He would naturally exert himself to the utmost to cut me out. I wonder why that should never before have occurred to me. Oh, Kit, must you be so odious? You know very well— Just so, Mamma, he said, as she faltered and stopped. How would it be if you told me the truth? Chapter 2. There was a short silence. She met his look and heaved a despairing sigh. "It is your Uncle Henry's fault," she disclosed, "and your father's." She paused and then said sorrowfully, "And mine. Try as I will, I cannot deny that, Kit. To be sure, I thought that when your papa died, I should be able to discharge some of my debts and be perfectly comfortable, but that was before I understood about jointures. Dearest, did you know that they are nothing but a take-in? No, how should you? But so it is. And what is more," she added impressively, "one's creditors do know it, which makes one wonder why they should take it into their heads to dun me now that I am a widow, in a much more disagreeable way than ever they did when Papa was alive. It seems quite idiotish to me, besides being so unfeeling." He had spent few of his adult years at home, but this disclosure came as no surprise to him. For as long as he could remember, poor Mamma's financial difficulties had been the cause of discomfort in his home. There had been painful interludes which had left Lady Denville in great distress. These had led to coldness and estrangement, and to a desperate policy of concealment. The Earl had been a man of upright principles, but he was not a warm-hearted man, and his mind was neither lively nor elastic. He was 15 years older than his wife, and he belonged as much by temperament as by age to a generation of rigid etiquette. He had only once allowed his feelings to overcome his judgment, when he had succumbed to the charm of the lovely Lady Amabel Cliff, lately enlarged from the schoolroom to become the rage of the ton, and had offered for her hand in marriage. Her father, the Earl of Baverstock, was the possessor of impoverished estates and a numerous progeny, and he had accepted the offer thankfully. But the very qualities which had fascinated Denville in the girl offended him in the wife, and he set himself to the task of eradicating them. His efforts were unsuccessful, and resulted merely in imbuing her with a dread of incurring his displeasure. She remained the same loving, irresponsible creature with whom he had become infatuated, but she lavished her love on her twin sons, and did her best to conceal from her husband the results of her imprudence. The twins adored her. Unable to detect beneath their father's unbending formality his real, if temperate, affection, they became at an early age their mamma's champions. She played with them, laughed with them, sorrowed with them, forgave them their sins, and sympathized with them in their dilemmas. They could perceive no fault in her, and directed their energies as they grew up to the task of protecting her from the censure of their formidable father. Mr. Fancourt, therefore, was neither surprised nor shocked to discover that his mother was encumbered by debt. He merely said, "Scorched, love. Just how does the land lie?" "I don't know." "Well, dearest, how can one remember everything one has borrowed for years and years?" That did startle him a little. Years and years. But, Mamma, when you were obliged to disclose to my father the fix you were in 3 years ago, wasn't it? Didn't he ask you for the sum total of your debts, and promise that they should be discharged?" "Yes, he did say that," she answered, "and I didn't tell him. Well, I didn't know, but I'm not trying to excuse myself, and I own I shouldn't have done so even if I had known. I can't explain to you, Kit, and if you mean to say that it was very wrong of me and cowardly, don't, because I am miserably aware of it. Only when Addlestrop wrote down everything I said—" "What?" exclaimed Kit. "Are you telling me he was present?" "Yes, oh yes. Well, your father reposed complete confidence in him. And it has always been he, you know, who managed everything, so— "Pretty well for one who set so much store by propriety," he interrupted, his eyes kindling, "to admit his man of business into such an interview." "I own I wished he had not, but I dare say he was obliged to, on account of its being Addlestrop who knew just what the estate could bear, and— "Addlestrop is a very good man in his way, and I don't doubt he has our interests at heart, but he's a purse-leech, and so my father should have known. If ever a grig was spent out of the way, he always behaved as if we should all of us go home by beggar's bush." "Yes, that's what Evelyn says," she agreed. "I might have been able to have told Papa the whole if he hadn't brought Addlestrop into it. That is, if I had known what it was. Indeed, I had the intention of being perfectly open with him. But whatever my faults, I am not a moorworm, Kit, so I shan't attempt to deceive you. I don't think I could have been open with Papa. Well, you know how it was, whenever he was displeased with one, don't you? But if I had known that my wretched affairs would fall upon Evelyn, I must have plucked up my courage to the sticking point and disclosed the whole to him." "If you had known what the whole was," he interpolated irrepressibly. "Yes, or if I could have brought myself to place my affairs in Addlestrop's hands." "Good God, no. It should have been a matter between you and my father. But there's no occasion for you to be blue-devilled because your affairs have fallen on Evelyn. He must always have been concerned in them, you know, and it makes no difference to him whether my father discharged your debts or left it to him to do so." "But you are quite wrong," she objected. "It makes a great deal of difference. Evelyn cannot discharge them." "Stuff," he said. "He has no more notion of economy than you have, but don't try to tell me that he has contrived in little more than a year to dissipate his inheritance. That's coming it too strong." "Certainly not. It isn't in his power to do so. Not that I mean to say he would wish to, for however volatile your father believed him to be, he has no such intention. And I must say, Kit, I consider it was most unjust of Papa to have left everything in that uncomfortable way, telling your Uncle Henry that he had done so because Evelyn was as volatile as I am. For he never knew about the two worst scrapes Evelyn was in, because you brought him off from his entanglement with that dreadful harpy who got her claws into him when you both came down from Oxford. And how you did it, Kit, I have long wanted to know. And it was I who paid his gaming debts when he was drawn into some Pall Mall hell, when he was by far too green to know what he was doing. I sold my diamond necklace, and your papa knew nothing whatsoever about it. So why he should have told your uncle that—" "You did what?" Kit interrupted, shaken for the first time during this session with his adored parent. She smiled brilliantly upon him. "I had it copied, of course. I'm not such a goose that I didn't think of that. It looks just as well. And what should I care for diamonds when one of my sons was on the rocks?" "But it was an heirloom." "I have no opinion of heirlooms," said her ladyship flatly. "If you mean to say that it belonged to Evelyn, I know it did. But pray, what use was it to him, when what he needed, quite desperately, poor love, was the money to pay his gaming debts? I told him about it afterwards, and I assure you he made not the least objection." "I dare say. And what of his son?" demanded Kit. "Dearest, you are too absurd. How should he raise an objection when he won't know anything about it?" Have you disposed of any more heirlooms?" he asked, regarding her with awe and some reluctant amusement. "No, I don't think so. But you know what a wretched memory I have. In any event, it doesn't signify, because what's done is done, and I have more important things to think of than a lot of hideous family jewels. Dearest, do pray stop being frivolous." "I didn't mean to be frivolous," he said meekly. "Well, don't ask me stupid questions about heirlooms, or talk nonsense about its being as easy for Evelyn to pay my debts as it would have been for your papa. You must have read that hateful will. Poor Evelyn has no more command over papa's fortune than you have. Everything was left to your uncle's discretion." He frowned a little. "I remember that my father created some kind of trust, but not that it extended to the income from the estate. My uncle has neither the power to withhold that, nor to question Evelyn's expenditure. As I recall, Evelyn was prohibited from disposing of any part of his principal, except with my uncle's consent, until he reaches the age of 30, unless at some time before that date my uncle should judge him to have outgrown his volatility. Don't eat me, Mamma. When the trust might be brought to an end, and Evelyn put in the undisputed possession of his inheritance. I know I thought my father need not have fixed on 30 as the proper age. 25 would have been a great deal more reasonable, and in no way remarkable. Evelyn was vexed, of course. Who wouldn't have been? But it made very little difference to him after all. You've said yourself that he has no intention of wasting his principal. You know, Mamma, the income is pretty considerable. What's more, my uncle told him at the time that he was prepared to consent to the sale of certain stocks to defray whatever large debts Evelyn had incurred, particularly any post-obit bonds, since he thought it not right that the income should perhaps be reduced to a monkey's allowance until they had all been paid. Yes, she agreed. He did say that, and it quite astonished me, for in general he's as close as wax, Kit. No, merely he doesn't live up to the door, and certainly not beyond it. But the thing is, Mamma, that he didn't wish Evelyn to succeed my father under a load of debt, and if you had but told him of the fix you were in, I'm persuaded he would have settled your debts along with the rest. She gazed at him incredulously. Henry? You must be out of your mind, Kit. When I think of the way he has always disapproved of me, and the rake-down he gave Evelyn, whose debts were nothing compared to mine— oh, no, no. I had liefer by far put a period to my existence than cast myself on his mercy. He would have imposed the most humiliating conditions on me, condemned me to live the rest of my days in that horrid dower-house at Ravenhurst, very likely, or worse. He was silent for a moment. Knowing that Henry, Lord Brumby, considered his charming sister-in-law incorrigible, he could not help feeling that there was some truth in what she said. His frown deepened. He said abruptly, "Why the devil didn't Evelyn tell him? He could have handled my uncle so much more easily than you could." "Do you think so?" she said doubtfully. "He never has done so. Besides, he didn't know just how things stood with me, because I never thought to tell him. Well, how was I to guess that nearly every soul I owed money to would suddenly start to dun me, and some of them in the rudest way, too? Not that I should have teased Evelyn with my difficulties when he was already in hot water with Henry on his own account. I hope you know me better than to suppose I should do such a selfish thing as that." A wry smile twisted his lips. "I'm beginning to, Mamma. I wish you will tell me how you expected to settle matters, though, if you didn't tell Evelyn." "Well, I didn't know then that I should be obliged to," she explained. "I mean, I never had done so, except now and then in a gradual way when I was particularly asked to, so you can imagine what a shock it was to me when Mr. Child positively refused, though with perfect civility, to lend me £3,000, which would have relieved my immediate difficulties, and even begged me not to overdraw the account by as much as a guinea more, just as if I hadn't paid the interest, which I promise you I did." Mr. Fancourt, considerably bemused, interrupted to demand, "But what's his talk of Child, Mamma? My father never banked with him." "Oh, no, but my father did, and your Uncle Baverstock does, of course, now that Grandpapa is dead, so I have been acquainted with Mr. Child for ever. A most superior man, Kit, who has always been so very kind to me, and that is how I come to have an account with him." Mr. Fancourt, his hair lifting gently on his scalp, ventured to inquire more particularly into the nature of his mamma's account with Child's bank. As far as he could ascertain from her explanation, it had its sole origin in a substantial loan made to her by the clearly besotted Mr. Child. Something in his expression, as he listened in gathering dismay, caused her to break off, laying a hand on his arm and saying imploringly, "Surely you must know how it is when one finds oneself—what does Evelyn call it? Oh, in the basket. I collect that has something to do with cockfighting, so disgusting and vulgar. Kit, haven't you got debts?" He shook his head, a rueful gleam in his eyes. "No, I'm afraid I haven't." "None?" she exclaimed. "Well, none that I can't discharge. I may owe a trifle here and there, but "Oh, don't look at me like that. I promise you I'm not a changeling, love." "How can you be so absurd? Only it does seem so extraordinary. But I expect you haven't had the opportunity to run into debt, living abroad as you do," she said excusingly. He gave a gasp, managed to utter, "Just so, Mamma," and went into a fit of uncontrollable laughter, dropping his head in his hands and clutching his chestnut locks. She was not in the least offended, but chuckled responsively and said, "Now you sound like yourself again. Do you know, for a moment, only for a moment, you looked like your father. You can't conceive the feel it gave me." He lifted his head, wiping his streaming eyes. "Oh, no, did I? Was it very bad? I'll try not to do so again. But tell me, when Child would give you no credit, didn't you then tell Evelyn?" "No, though I did think I might be obliged to, till it darted into my mind in the middle of the night to apply to Edgbaston for a loan. Isn't it odd, dearest, how often the answer to a problem will flash upon one in the night?" "Apply to Lord Edgbaston?" he ejaculated. "Yes, and he agreed to lend me £5,000, at interest, of course. And so then I was in funds again. Oh, Kit, don't frown like that. Are you thinking that I should rather have applied to Bonamy Ripple? I couldn't, you see, because he had gone off to Paris, and the matter was a little urgent." For as long as Kit could remember, this elderly and extremely wealthy dandy had run tame about his home, regarded by himself and Evelyn as a fit subject for ridicule, and by their father with indifference. He had been one of Lady Denville's many suitors, and when she had married Lord Denville, he had become her most faithful cicisbeo. He was generally supposed to have remained a bachelor for her sake, but since his figure resembled nothing so much as an overripe pear, and his countenance was distinguished only by an expression of vacuous amiability and the snuff-stains on his fat cheeks, not even the more determined brewers of scandal broth could detect anything in his devotion but food for mockery. The twins, inured to his frequent appearances in Hill Street, accepted him with much the same contemptuous tolerance as they would have felt for an overfed lapdog which their mamma chose to encourage. But although Kit would have hooted with ribald laughter at the suggestion that any impropriety attached to Sir Bonamy's fidelity, he was far from thinking it desirable that his mother should apply to him for help in her financial difficulties, and he said so. "Good gracious, Kit! As though I hadn't often done so," she exclaimed. "It is by far the most comfortable arrangement, because he is so rich that he doesn't care how many of my bonds he holds, and never does he demand the interest on the loans he makes me. As for dunning me to repay him, I'm persuaded such a notion never entered his head. He may be absurd and growing fatter every day, but I have been used to depend on him for years in all manner of ways. It was he who sold my jewels for me, and had them copied, for instance. Besides—" She stopped abruptly. "Oh, I wish I had never mentioned him. It has brought it all back to me. That was what made Evelyn go away." "Ripple?" he asked, wholly at sea. "No, Lord Silverdale," she replied. "For the Lord's sake, mamma," he expostulated, "what are you talking about? What the deuce has Silverdale to say to anything?" "He has a brooch of mine," she said, sunk suddenly into gloom. "I staked it, when he wouldn't accept my vows and continued playing. Something told me the luck was about to turn, and so it might have, if Silverdale would but have played on. Not that I cared for losing the brooch, for I never liked it above half, and I can't conceive why I should have purchased it. I expect it must have taken my fancy, but I don't recall why." "Has Evelyn gone off to redeem it?" he interrupted. "Where is Silverdale?" "At Brighton. Evelyn said there was no time to be lost in buying the brooch back, so off he posted. At least he drove himself in his phaeton with his new team of greys, and he said that he meant to go first to Ravenhurst, which indeed he did." "Just a moment, mamma," Kit intervened, the frown returning to his brow. "Why did Evelyn feel it necessary to go to Brighton? Of course he was obliged to redeem your brooch. Silverdale must have expected him to do so. But I should have supposed that a letter to Silverdale with a draft on his bank for whatever sum the brooch represented would have answered the purpose." Lady Denville raised large, stricken eyes to his face. "Yes, but you don't perfectly understand how it was, dearest. I can't think how I came to be so addle-brained, but when I staked it, I'd quite forgotten that it was one of the pieces I had had copied. For my part, I consider Silverdale was very well served for having been so quizzy and disobliging about accepting my vows. But Evelyn said that it was of the first importance to recover the wretched thing before Silverdale discovered that it was only a copy." Mr. Fancourt drew an audible breath. "I should rather think he might say so." "But, Kit," said her ladyship earnestly, "that is much more improvident than anything I should dream of doing. I set its value at £500, which was the value of the real brooch, but the copy isn't worth a tithe of that. It seems to be quite wickedly extravagant of Evelyn to be squandering such a sum on mere trumpery." Mr. Fancourt toyed for a moment with the idea of explaining to his erratic parent that her view of the matter was, to put it mildly, incorrect. But only for a moment. He was an intelligent young man, and he almost instantly realized that any such attempt would be a waste of breath. So he merely said, as soon as he could command his voice to say anything, "Yes, well, never mind that. When did Evelyn set forth on this errand?" "Dear one, you cannot have been attending. I told you, 10 days ago." "Well, it wouldn't have taken him 10 days to accomplish it, if Silverdale was in Brighton, so it seems that he can't have been there. Evelyn must have discovered where he was gone to, and decided to follow him." She brightened. "Oh, do you think that is what happened? I have been a prey to the most hideous forebodings, but if Silverdale has gone to that place of his in Yorkshire, it is very understandable that Evelyn shouldn't have returned yet." She paused, considering the matter, and then shook her head. "No, Evelyn didn't go to Yorkshire. He spent one night at Ravenhurst, just as he told me he would, and then he drove to Brighton. That I do know, for his groom accompanied him. But whether he found Silverdale there or not I cannot tell, because naturally Challow doesn't know. But he returned to Ravenhurst the same day and stayed the night there. I thought he would do that. In fact, I thought he must have stayed for several days, for he told me that he had matters to attend to at home, and might be absent from London for perhaps as much as a se'nnight. But he left Ravenhurst the very next morning, and under the most peculiar circumstances." "In what way peculiar, mamma?" "He took only his night-bag with him, and he sent Challow back to London with the rest of his gear, saying that he had no need of him." "Oh," said Kit. His tone was thoughtful, but not astonished. "Did he tell Challow where he was going?" "No, and that is another circumstance which makes me very uneasy." "It need not," he said, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Did he send his valet back to London too? I take it that Fimber is still with him." "Yes, and that is another thing that cuts up my peace. He wouldn't take Fimber to Sussex. He said there was no room for him in the phaeton, which is true, of course, though it set up all Fimber's bristles. I must own that I wished he might have found room for him, because I know Fimber will never let him come to harm. Challow is very good too, but not as firm. It is the greatest comfort to know that they are both with Evelyn when he goes off on one of his starts." "I'm sure it is, mamma," he said gravely. "But that's just it," she pointed out. "Neither is with him. Kit, is no laughing matter. I'm persuaded that some accident has befallen him, or that he's in some dreadful scrape. How can you laugh?" "I couldn't, if I thought it was true. Now, come out of the dismals, mamma. I never knew you to be such a goose. What do you imagine could have happened to Evelyn?" You don't think that he did see Silverdale and quarrelled with him, and went off alone that day to meet him?" "Taking his night-bag with him in place of a second? Good God, no. You have put yourself in the hips, love. If I know Evelyn, he's gone off on a private affair which he didn't want you to know anything about. You would if he had taken Fimber or Challow with him, and he's well aware of that. They may be a comfort to you, my dear, but they're often a cursed embarrassment to him. As for accidents, fudge, you'd have been apprised of anything of that nature, depend upon it. He didn't set out to visit Silverdale without his card-case." "No, very true," she agreed. "I never thought of that." Her spirits revived momentarily. only to sink again. Her beautiful eyes clouded. She said, "But at such a moment, Kit, when so much hinges upon his presenting himself in Mount Street tomorrow. Oh, no, he could not have gone off on one of his adventures." "Couldn't he?" said Kit. "I wonder. I wish you will tell me a little more about this engagement of his, Mamma." "You've said that there has been no time for him to tell me about it himself, but that's doing it very much too brown, my dear. There might have been no time for a letter to have reached me, telling me that he had come to the point of offering for this girl, but he never mentioned her name to me in the last letter I had from him, far less the possibility that he would shortly be married, and that, you know, is so unlike him that if anyone but you had broken this news to me, I should have thought it a Banbury story. Now, I know of only one reason which would make Evelyn withhold his confidence from me." He paused, his eyelids puckering, as though he were trying to bring some remote object into focus. "If he were in some fix from which I couldn't help him to escape, if he were forced into doing something repugnant to him—" "Oh, no, no, no!" cried Lady Denville distressfully. "It is not repugnant to him, and he was not forced into it. He discussed it with me in the most reasonable manner, saying that, while he was resolved on matrimony, he believed it would suit him best to enter upon a contract in the old-fashioned way, without violence of feeling on either side. And I must say, Kit, that I think he is very right, for the females he falls in love with are never eligible, in fact, excessively ineligible. Moreover, he is so very prone to fall in love, poor boy, that it is of the first importance to arrange a match for him with a sensible, well-bred girl who won't break her heart or come to points with him every time she discovers that he has a cher amie." "Of the first importance!" he exclaimed. "For Evelyn, of all men. I collect that if she is sufficiently indifferent and well-bred, nothing else is of consequence. She may be bran-faced or swivel-eyed or—" "On the contrary, it goes without saying that there must be nothing in her appearance to give Evelyn a disgust of her, and also that each of them should be ready to like the other." He sprang up, ejaculating, "Oh, good God!" He glanced down at her, his eyes very bright, but not with laughter. "You made such a marriage, Mamma. Is that what you wish Evelyn to do? Is it?" She did not answer for a moment, and when she did speak, it was with a little constriction. "I didn't make such a marriage, Kit. Your father fell in love with me. The Fancourts said he was besotted, but nothing would turn him from his determination to marry me. And I was just 17, and he was so handsome, so exactly like the hero schoolgirls dream of. But the Fancourts were right. We were very ill-suited." He said in an altered tone, "I didn't know. I beg your pardon, Mamma. I shouldn't